President Trump hits Canada, Mexico, and China with steep new tariffs. President Trump slapped sweeping tariffs on goods from Mexico, Canada, and China on Saturday, sending shockwaves through the global supply chain and sparking fears of a disruptive trade war. Trump signed executive orders placing duties of 25% on imports from Mexico and Canada, except for a 10% rate on Canadian oil and 10% on all imports from China. Why only 10% for China? I don't get that. Why not, 25% or more? Anyway, leaders from Mexico and Canada said they have been informed that the tariffs would go into effect beginning Tuesday, a move that punishes two of America's top allies for what Trump has described as their failure to halt the flow of migrants and drugs into the United States. He said he would tax Chinese products by 10%. Each of the targeted countries has promised to retaliate with their own tariffs on American goods. The three countries supply the U.S. with food, medicine, oil, cars, timber, and electronics, and account for more than a third of all trade with the United States. The tariffs against Canada and Mexico upend a trade pact that dates back 3 decades and has led to tightly integrated industries across North America. Trump himself negotiated signed the new version of the account during the first term, and at the time praised the 2020 U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement as the fairest, most balanced, and beneficial trade agreement we have ever signed into law, he said at that time. The tariffs threatened to deeply disrupt the economies of Mexico, Canada, and China and drive up consumer prices in the U.S. Experts say some effects will be significant to quickly felt, with American consumers likely finding higher prices for fresh vegetables and fruits and other perishable imports in a matter of days. I'm thinking as I'm reading this to you, China should be very happy that they only get slapped with 10%. Now, foreigners don't pay the tariffs, American businesses and consumers do, said Jock O'Connell, a trade expert at Beacon Economics at Los Angeles-based research firm. Consumers across the country are still smarting from the surge of food prices in the wake of the pandemic. High inflation was widely considered an important factor in Trump's election, and the president has promised to bring down prices for groceries and other goods. But these new tariffs are almost certain to do the opposite, economists say. Well, the Americans will just have to buy American products, won't they? Is the Trump administration comfortable with hiking the prices of avocados and guacamole ahead of the Super Bowl, said Joseph Brusuelis, chief economist at the accounting firm RSM US, adding that he was not joking. Well, you don't have to eat avocados and guacamole, you can eat something else. I love coleslaw, for example. Now, for many other products, prices may start to increase only as inventories are depleted. Car prices will almost surely rise. U.S. auto manufacturing is also interlinked with Mexico and Canada, with parts going back and forth across borders many times. That analysis say they're not really American cars, but North American cars. The same goes for gas prices, especially in the Great Lakes and Rocky Mountains west, which depend on Canadian oil. Trump has repeatedly talked about bringing down gas prices, but the U.S. still imports billions of dollars of crude, and ramping up domestic production is not so easy or quick. The 10% tariffs on China will add to 10% to 25% duties that Trump imposed on many Chinese imports during his first term, and which former President Biden kept in place. That will hit American household pocketbooks broadly because China is such a big supplier of consumer items, which are cheap anyway. Now, the overall impact of what the president has done is to throw a wrench into the highly integrated continental economy, said O'Connell. He noted that tariffs and counter-tariffs, if left in place for a while, will slow economic growth in all three countries. I'm sure it'll slow growth in Mexico and Canada anyway. Now, under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, Any country has the right to pull out at any time, and a U.S. president can impose new tariffs without approval from Congress by invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which authorizes executive action to counter threats to national security, foreign policy, and the U.S. economy. Trump had been warning for months that he planned to impose tariffs on imports in a bid to lure manufacturing back to the United States. Campaigning before the November election, he vowed at one point to impose an across-the-board tax of 10% or 20% on all goods entering the U.S. At another, he threatened a 200% tariff on vehicles from Mexico. "Come make your products in America," he told companies in a speech at the World Economic Forum earlier this year. "If not," he said, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff." But Trump sees tariffs also as a negotiating tactic to extract compromises from other nations on matters that have little to do with trade. He described the tariffs on Mexico and Canada as retribution because those countries have not done more to stop migrants and drugs such as fentanyl from entering the United States. But many experts say the tariffs have the potential to spur more migration. Economies in Mexico and Canada rely much more heavily on the U.S. than the other way around, and the threat of tariffs has made the peso and the Canadian dollar very volatile recent weeks. The value of Mexico's exports and imports amounts to almost 90% of the country's gross domestic products, according to the World Bank data. Economists warn that even a small increase in tariffs on goods destined to the U.S. poses serious risks for the country, the economy. Under the worst-case scenario, the Mexican economy will fall into recession, the currency will depreciate, and inflation will rise, reads a report released by the economic research firm Moody's Analytics. Analysts say that if tariffs drag down the Mexican economy, more Mexican workers without proper documentation will seek to enter the U.S. If Mexico goes into a recession, you'll see a surge in immigration, said economist Brucelas. Even E. Ellis, a research professor of Latin American Studies at the U.S. Army War College's Strategic Studies Institute, described tariffs as a catastrophic risk, quote-unquote. If you essentially deep six the American economy, there are people who are going to once again flow across the U.S. border, he said. The country's economy is already on shaky ground. Mexico faces its largest budget deficit since the 1980s. Data shows 36% of the population lives in poverty, with 7% living in extreme poverty. A severe recession in Mexico in the 1990s contributed to some 5 million Mexicans immigrating to the United States. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum has insisted that Mexico has a plan to counter tariffs. As she said, "We are prepared for any scenario." And although she said that Mexico had been doing everything in our power to prevent tariffs, she said, "What do we want? That dialogue with respect prevails." Canadian officials have also promised an aggressive response. "Being smart means retaliating where it hurts," said Chrystia Freeland, former finance minister who represented Canada in USMCA negotiations. She said, "Our counterpunch must be dollar for dollar, and it must be precisely and painfully targeted. Florida orange growers, Wisconsin dairy farmers, Michigan dishwasher manufacturers, and much more." If China, Canada, and Mexico retaliate by slapping tariffs on American products entering their markets, that will very likely slow the volume of trade. The ripple effects will be felt across the entire supply chain, hurting businesses and employment at ports, warehouses, and other logistics and transportation operations. Higher inflation from tariffs may hit Los Angeles especially hard coming soon after the fires, which appear to be pushing up prices for rents and other services and products. The timing could not be worse. It will make for a double whammy for Southern California, said Sung-Won Son, professor of finance and economics at Loyola Marymount University. During his first term, Trump in 2018 imposed tariffs on steel from Mexico and other countries, prompting counter tariffs on American farm goods and straining U.S.-Mexico relations. At that time, he also threatened broader tariffs on all Mexican goods, but he eventually backed off after American business leaders complained that it would hurt them, and his administration exacted a promise from Mexico authorities to do more to stop migrants from reaching the U.S. border. Marcelo Ebrard, Mexico's economy secretary, suggested last year that the only goal of tariffs is to achieve political gains, given the makeup of the highly integrated global economy. The United States economy is not a manufacturing economy, he said, and I'm sorry, but it will not be that way again. And this is from Los Angeles Times on DNYUZ. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.